Well, what a weekend that was. The Grand Prix Formula 1 in Sao Paulo, Brazil saw endless drama and chaos. From the qualifying race being moved to Sunday because of the heavy rain, to several crashes, to another penalty being handed to Max Verstappen. But the Red Bull frontman, despite a rocky start in the qualifying race, broke his winless streak and climbed up to first place, edging him closer to a complete season victory. While Ferrari dominated the last two weekends, it was Alpine that climbed to second and third place with Esteban Ocon and Pierre Gasly respectively. Joining me now for the entire breakdown of the weekend that was is talkSPORT driving reporter John Jackson. John, it was a weekend defined by the weather.
It was a chaotic weekend at Interlagos in Brazil. We've seen it before a few times, and if you've been to Brazil, you know what the weather's like there. When it rains, it just rains and it never stops raining. That had a huge impact on things this weekend, and in fact, I pretty much for the first time ticked off everything on my Formula 1 bingo card. Before the weekend started, we had the news that Oliver Bearman was replacing Kevin Magnussen, so a bit more practice for him as he gets ready to take that Haas seat full-time next year. Then we have a sprint race where McLaren are loving life because Lando Norris wins the race ahead of Oscar Piastri. A little bit of team orders there with Oscar letting Lando through. That's great for the battle for the title because Max Verstappen finishes third, but actually gets a 5-second penalty for an infringement under the virtual safety car. That drops him down to fourth. So again, McLaren are loving life at this point. They then can't do qualifying because the rain is just too heavy, and I've seen pictures and videos from Interlagos and I wouldn't want to be driving in that, let alone at the speeds they drive at in Formula 1. So they put it on Sunday morning, basically like Formula E. They do the qualifying in the morning and then they bring the race forward slightly to avoid even more rain and do the race in the afternoon. It means that team members, all the teams and Formula 1 and the FIA are getting there at 4 a.m. to make sure that they can get this show on the road. So huge shout out to them. We then have qualifying, which has 5 red flags in it, the longest qualifying, not ever, but seriously certainly felt like it, with Williams and Aston Martin having both of their cars damaged, which actually meant that Alex Albon in the Williams couldn't even get into the race because they couldn't repair his car in time. And then we had a race where the bottom line is Max Verstappen won the race, but you'd never guess how he won that race and you'd never guess who was on the podium with him. So a very eventful weekend, a very entertaining weekend and a very long weekend.
John, despite Max Verstappen being slapped with another penalty and not the best qualifying position, he's now edging closer to that title victory after breaking his losing drought over the weekend. But it was a bit touch and go for a while.
Now I've got a big list here and I could go down it and tell you everything that happened in that race, but this video would be an hour long and you'd probably turn off. The headline is Max Verstappen won the race from 17th on the grid and he now has a 62-point gap at the top of the Drivers' Championship and he could wrap things up next time out in Las Vegas. Ridiculous from him. You know, we know what Max can do. We know he's an exceptional driver. He's a 3-time, soon probably to be 4-time world champion. He's done it in a row and no one's really come close for a long time. Qualifying 17th was, a bit of bad luck for him because of the disruption in qualifying. And then to start there, make up 7 places on the first lap. You knew he was a man on a mission. He got a bit of luck on lap 32 because Lando Norris and George Russell were both battling it out for the lead. And he decided, along with the 2 Alpines, that they would stay out a bit longer when those 2 guys pitted. Then Franco Colapinto smashed his car up on lap 32. It brought out a safety car and it meant that they could basically pit and not be penalised for pitting and changing for tyres. And then Max Verstappen made very short work of Esteban Ocon on the restart, eventually nearly winning by 19.5 seconds. So just let that sink in for a minute. He started 17th in treacherous conditions in not the best car. It's probably the 3rd best car at the moment, that Red Bull, and he still won the race by nearly 19.5 seconds. If that isn't deserving of winning a world championship for the 4th time, I don't know what is.
Yes, but even with that win from Verstappen, John, it means that the Red Bull drivers' title rival Lando Norris didn't crack the top 5 despite winning Saturday's sprint race.
It'll be a really tough weekend for Lando Norris to take because I think he started to dream a little bit because you're a racing driver, you always want to win and you're never going to rule it out until it's mathematically impossible. But to have won that sprint race on Saturday and see that him and his teammate Oscar Piastri were so dominant in McLaren and for then things to go so wrong when it came to the race weekend, it's going to be a really bitter pill for him to swallow because he would have definitely dreamt. I'm going to put it out there right now. To watch Max Verstappen, someone you're fighting for the championship, do what he did and win by 19.5 seconds from 17th. It's kind of something you've got to take your hat off to. And he actually put a post on social media saying, you know, as you'd say, Max, that was simply lovely, because you just have to hold your hands up and say, seriously impressive driving. Now, obviously, he's going to approach the next race weekend in Las Vegas with as much gusto as possible. He's going to still believe he can do it, but I think deep down he's going to know that his chances are gone. And I think I think Lando might have a bigger problem next year, because obviously Oscar Piastri has kind of played along recently, whereas Oscar Piastri next year is going to be in a car that's really strong, and he is a guy that wants to win a championship. He's done it in the Junior Series. He wants to be an F1 world champion. So I think Lando's going to have other things to worry about, because Oscar Piastri is not going to go as easy as he's been going this year. So 2025 shaping up to be good, but I think for Lando, I'm pretty sure that's his hopes dashed.
John, but we really weren't expecting Alpine to be the drivers battling it out for the top 3 spots in the Brazilian F1, when it truly has felt like a showdown between Red Bull, Ferrari and McLaren this season.
So if you'd said to me that Alpine are going to have 2 drivers on the podium after one of those drivers had led the race for a little while at the start of the year, I'd have said you're crazy, you're looking at the wrong year, because that car was very much, not the worst, but very closely behind that, like the second worst car on the grid behind the Sauber. And just fantastic turnaround from them. And Oliver Oakes, the brand new team principal who came in a few races ago, I mean, he looks like a miracle worker, doesn't he, really? Because they got 33 points on Sunday alone, and you know they were in the sort of like 13 or 14 points before that. They've now shot up from second last in the team standings to 6th place. They've overtaken Haas. They probably won't get near Aston Martin. There's probably too much of a gap there, but for them, where the money is, in prize money, they've absolutely bagged about £50 million there. So a great weekend for them. Good to see that Esteban Ocon and Pierre Gasly, who we know are not the best of friends, we've heard all about their rivalry since they were tiny little kids. It was nice that they could celebrate on the podium. It was probably good that they had Max Verstappen there as a mediator, sort of kind of friends with everyone, to make it not such an awkward moment. But I mean, I'm sure they'll go back to their rivalry at some point, but good to see them celebrating, and fantastic scenes afterwards if you saw it in the TV coverage of the whole team going absolutely crazy. You know, this is their lives. These people who travel around the world and go to 24 different race weekends every year, not seeing family, not seeing their kids, not seeing their friends, to have such an amazing weekend out of completely nowhere, that's absolutely incredible. And I'm sure there's some pretty sore heads over in Brazil this morning.
Just finally, John, can you give me a big roundup of all the drama and chaos from the weekend? Because it did seem as though so much happened, so many stops and starts and issues.
Yeah, away from all the success, it was another weekend of penalties and potential penalties. We've already talked about Max Verstappen getting a 5-second penalty for the sprint race, so that demoted him a place. Then on Sunday, the race start was just absolute chaos, because Lance Stroll in the Aston Martin, after his team had built that car back up after he crashed in qualifying earlier that day, then span out and then beached himself in the gravel on the formation lap, which meant that the cars go round, and obviously there's a car stuck there into turn 1. It's in a really dangerous place. They can't start the race properly, so they do an aborted start there. But because the green lights weren't flashing, the cars shouldn't have gone. But Lando Norris led the cars off the line, and a lot of them followed. Max Verstappen, right at the back, wasn't one of them. So a lot of cars went past, and they went around again, and then there was just chaos, and no one knew what was going on. And eventually they decided, okay, we're going to do a proper restart. We're going to have a 10-minute gap and restart. Those drivers were then looked into, because they should never be pulling away when there's not a green light there. It was an amber light, which you shouldn't be moving under. You should be waiting further instructions. They've got a fine. Lando Norris has got a fine of €5,000, I believe it is, and sort of warned about his conduct. Then we have the other thing, that when that restart happened, we have Mercedes, and some of their mechanics were just changing their tyre pressures. Now, there's a really complicated reason as to why they'd be changing tyre pressures, but the bottom line is you shouldn't be changing tyre pressures, and you're not allowed to change tyre pressures when the car is on the grid and the tyres are on the car. If the tyres have been taken off the car, then you can absolutely change the tyre pressures. However, they were doing it while the tyres were still on the car, and they were also in line for possible disqualification. It's kind of an unprecedented incident, this one. In the end, they just received a fine and a warning as well. And then we had Carlos Sainz, who didn't finish the race, span out and had an incident there, and he was very much trying to get that car back working whilst the marshals were trying to put the loop through to lift the car out of the way, and he was warned about dangerous driving. So a lot of warnings going on. A lot of hours after the race was finally classified, because they can't do it until they speak to everyone and get their side of the story. But eventually, it's all been signed off and the race weekend is done, and we look forward to Las Vegas in a few weekends' time, with only 3 race weekends to go this season. Las Vegas, we have Qatar, and then we have Abu Dhabi, where, I mean, Max Verstappen could wrap things up in the next race. But as I said earlier on, I have a feeling we'll be crowning a new F1 World Champion in Qatar.
John Jackson, thank you so much for your time, as always, for our weekend wrap-up from the Grand Prix Formula One. Now, we have a few weeks off before the next Formula One weekend, which will take place in Las Vegas on the November 23rd weekend. So please join us again here for a roundup of the race as we near closer to the end of the season. And don't forget to like and subscribe to the talkSPORT driving page.